Holidays can be chaos, can't they? They can. Holidays can be messy. Holidays can remind us of those we miss who aren't with us. They can remind us of relationships that are broken. They remind us of the way things once were. And they can remind us that they're not that way any longer. And they can be hard. They can be tough. Now, that doesn't mean we don't celebrate. Okay, we're not here this morning to point out all of the reasons we shouldn't have holidays, right? But I think it's important to acknowledge that they can be difficult. And many of you are out there saying, I didn't need to be reminded. We get it. It's hard. It can be tough. And it can be tough because relationships are so important to us. The way we deal with others and the people we love and the people around us is a huge part of our life. And in Paul's letter to the Colossians that we're going to look at this morning, Paul offers hope in this letter. He offers hope in the way that we respond to those situations just like that. And this church in Colossae was experiencing some difficulties, and we'll get to that in just a minute. First of all, so Dr. Hamilton a couple weeks ago said, hey, I'm going to be taking a train, an Amtrak train, from western Colorado to Omaha, Nebraska. And I'm going to get off in Omaha, and I should be getting off about 5:30 or 6. So I'll drive those 3 hours or so to Lawrence, and we should be good to go, right? And then he said, however, there's one problem, and that problem is that Amtrak is notoriously late. And so considering it's, I don't remember how long it was, a 16-hour train ride or something like that, he said, would you be okay with just going ahead and plan on preaching that Sunday? I'd probably be fine, but just in case, I said, sure, absolutely. Well, Mark is not here. I got a text this morning that said, yep, sure enough, haven't made it to Omaha yet, still on my way. And I said, hey, enjoy worshiping with your family this morning. He said, I know you got this, no problem. But that's where he is this morning. I had a couple of people go, so the guy that's preaching, he's not where he's normally sitting up there. So I suppose I am the interim preacher, something like that. I don't know. So, that's where he is this morning. I was also going to mention, I know I'm kind of jumping around here. Last week, we asked for your help in helping the teens pack some shoe boxes for Operation Christmas Child. And through your help and through their hard work, they were able to pack 42 shoe boxes that are going to go to children around the world. Now, that's the number I left with. Was there any more? 42? That was awesome. Great. So thank you so much for helping with that. I have a brother-in-law, and I have actually a few of them, but I have a brother-in-law who said this to me on September 9th of 2002. So that was over 15 years ago. He said to me, I figured it must end well because you were not freaking out. So my brother-in-law and I will never forget this day because I will never forget the way this turned out. September 9th, 2002, the Kansas City Chiefs played the Cleveland Browns. And if you remember this game, this particular game, Dwayne Rudd was a linebacker for the Cleveland Browns, and this game made him famous in a bad way. Not so good way. See, the Chiefs were down 39-37, and they were on their own 47-yard line, and they had just a few seconds left in the game. Now, my brother-in-law Ryan used to travel with a band. He's a drummer, and he was getting back late. This is before either of us had kids, and so we had planned to get together later that night to watch the Chiefs versus the Browns recording. And we kind of made this agreement that, hey, no, we're not going to find out who won. We're not going to find out anything. We're just going to pretend like we're watching the game live. So don't figure out what happened. Perfect. That's good. So I don't remember why I did this or what I was doing, but I turned on my radio at some point that afternoon, and I turned it on just in time, not knowing what station it was on, just in time to hear the Chiefs broadcaster say, "If I would have told you this story, you'd have never believed it. You had to see it." Morton Anderson kicks a game-winning field goal with no time on the clock, and the Chiefs win 40-39. And I went, ah! Boop. I didn't do when I should have, but I was like, what? And so I listened to the rest of it. Chiefs win 40-39. I turned it off. I show up, Amy and I show up at Ryan and Nikki's house, and I had to pretend that I didn't know how the game turned out. All I knew is the final score, and that something happened that made the announcer say, if I would have told you the story, you would have never believed me. So here's what happened. Does anybody remember this game? Okay, so you need to look this up. September 9th, thank you, Jim. You remember it? Back there, yes. September 9th, 2002, Trent Green, Priest Holmes, Morton Anderson, Tony Gonzalez, all these kind of old school Chiefs, on their own 47-yard line. There's just a few seconds left. Trent Green drops back to pass. Dwayne Rudd of the Browns is trying to, he's blitzing. He's trying to get Trent Green. He grabs Trent Green around the waist, swings him around, and as he swings him around, Trent Green throws the ball backwards. Dwayne Rudd thinks that he has just sacked Trent Green and that the game is over. Because in his mind, he was down. He did not see Trent Green toss the ball backwards. Dwayne Rudd jumps up in celebration, takes his helmet, and throws it, thinking the game was over. What actually happened was the ball lands in John Tate's arms. Now, John Tate is an offensive tackle. He's like 6'6", 340 pounds. John Tate takes the ball from about his own 40-yard line and starts just trucking up the sideline. Time has expired by this point. He has 2 or 3 blockers in front of him, and he's, as Chris Berman would say, was rumbling, bumbling, and stumbling, and gets pushed out of bounds at the 25-yard line. He thought it was over. So I'm watching this with my brother-in-law. I have heard what the final score is. I know the Chiefs win this game. But he's out of bounds. Time has expired. The Chiefs are still down 39-37 to the Cleveland Browns. What happened was, when Dwayne Rudd threw off his helmet, thinking the time the game was over. The game wasn't over because the ball was still in play. So the Browns were assessed, true Cleveland Browns style, right? The Browns were assessed a 15-yard penalty, and the game cannot end on a defensive penalty. The Chiefs got the ball at the 10-yard line. No time left. They get one more play. Just enough time for Morton Anderson to kick a field goal, and the Chiefs win. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Had I told you that story, you'd have never believed it. You had to see it for yourself. So the whole time this is going on, I'm sitting there going, I have no idea how this ends, or how we're going to get to the ending that I already know is going to happen. I know they win. I don't know how, but somehow they win. There are zeros on the clock. The score says Browns 39, Chiefs 37, but I know the Chiefs win this game. And so after this happens, where John Tate runs out of bounds, no time on the clock, Ryan turns off the TV. And he just does this. He just does. See, he's a huge Chiefs fan. I could take it or leave it. But he's doing this. And he looks over at me. And I'm sitting there and I'm going. And I said, you might want to watch a little bit further. And so he watches this and he's going, what just happened there? I said, I know. And he said, you knew how this ended, didn't you? And I said, I did. I turned on the radio and I saw the final score. I didn't know what happened, but I knew how it ended. And he said, I knew you must have known how it ended because you weren't freaking out. We can live life without freaking out because we know how it ends. If we don't live life without freaking out, we either don't trust how it ends, we don't believe that it could really end that way, or we've just never heard how it ends. So what Paul does in Colossians is he reminds the Colossians of who they are, of where they've been, of what Christ has done for them. He reminds them of how this all shakes out. So in Colossians chapter 3, I'm going to start in verse 12, and then, you know me, I've got to go back a little ways and unpack this a little bit. But in Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 12, I'm going to read through 17. So Paul says this in his letter to the Colossians. He says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. And then he says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So this all sounds great, right? This all sounds nice. It all sounds like, yeah, that'd be awesome if I could do that. But Paul, you're asking us to have compassion, to have kindness, to have humility, to be gentle, to be patient, to bear with each other, to forgive as the Lord has forgiven us, and to love. Now, those are all words we've heard before in Scripture. They're all things that we know Scripture calls us to, but they're also words that make us say, much easier said than done, right? So how can we have these virtues? How is it possible that we could live in such a way that we clothe ourselves with compassion and with kindness and gentleness? And notice it doesn't offer us any, there's no qualifications here. There's no so if the other people offer you kindness and don't ever do anything to you, then please reciprocate that. There's no qualifications like that. Paul says this is what you're supposed to do without qualification, without justifying anything. Just clothe yourselves with these. So let's get a little bit of an understanding. And first of all, kids, hey kids, I know you're here with us today. And thank you for being in here, this being a Thanksgiving holiday weekend. We wanted you to be in here. And so thank you, parents. Your kids are awesome, and they're great to be in here. So if they start making noise and stuff, and they're young enough that they can't control it, I just see like fifth graders going, woo, he said we can make noise. Hey, we're good, all right? We want them in here, so thank you. But a little bit of a background on this letter to the Colossians. See, this is one letter where Paul did not start this church. Paul did not start the church at Colossae. He didn't start it. It was actually started by a gentleman named Epaphras. Okay, and we see Epaphras' name kind of pop up in different letters that Paul wrote. But see, Paul didn't write this one, or Paul did write this one. He did not start this church. In fact, he had never even been to this church. He'd never met these people. He'd never seen them. But this letter was written as a result of a visit from Epaphras. Kids, can you say Epaphras? Epaphras, yes. Someone should name their child Epaphras. Parker's got this one. I can see you in a few years saying, remember I said I'd name him? I did. And then you blame me. So Epaphras visits Paul in prison. And Epaphras reports to Paul. See, Paul loves to hear how these different churches are doing, not just his own, but he wants to hear how the gospel is being spread. And Epaphras tells him, he says, hey, that church at Colossae, it's really doing well. It really is. There's some great things going on there. It's growing. Sunday mornings, there's energy. It may not have been Sunday mornings, but there's energy, and the music is pretty good. I mean, I'd love to hear some different songs, but it's really we can live with it. It's good. I've got some good friends there. I really fit in well. I've got some people that I just feel like are in the same. Okay, they probably didn't do all that, but overall things were good. But Epaphras says, but if there's one thing I'm concerned about. He said, I'm nervous that their faith may wilt under the pressures around them, the cultural and societal pressures around them. So Paul says, well, hey, we need to address that. We can't just let it be a concern and just hope it takes care of itself. I'm going to write them a letter. And that's where this Colossians comes from. This is a letter where Paul writes to the church, to the Colossians, and encourages them not to wilt under the cultural pressures. Now, so I brought with me today, anybody else, so these are biscuits in a tube. Now, these biscuits in a tube, they are pressurized, right? Now, is it just the women in my family? Or is there others out there who they're like, I am not opening those things? Anybody else? Okay, yeah. So we've got the biscuits in a tube. Now, don't judge us. I know others of you are like, there are biscuits in a tube. I make my... Yes, and these are cinnamon rolls because I wanted to use them later too. Okay, so at my parents' house on Thursday, or maybe it was on the next day on Friday. Dad was making biscuits and gravy, and some of you have had his biscuits and gravy. And my mom is terrified of this little tube. Now she's terrified of this little tube because her own father used to chase her around with this and go, up, 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 up. It's coming. When's it going to pop? And so this is, if you don't know what this does, if you do your own homemade biscuits, or just don't eat them, is you start right here and you start peeling. And so I'm going to go do this right in front of Jennifer Brewster. No. You start peeling, and at some point you peel back enough. Oh, you don't like it either. I can see Kim over there. At some point you peel back enough that the can will go boom. And sometimes it's a pretty big pop. Other times it just kind of goes, and it's done. It's like an adult Jack in the Box is really what it is. But it's pressurized. They pressurize it, and so you open it, and when you open, all of a sudden that pressure becomes enough that once it gets just a little bit of space, that air will just go, and this thing will open up, and apparently it's kind of scary. I'll be honest, I don't really like it that much either, but it's like, oh, I'll do that, come on. And then sometimes you have to, it doesn't, and then you got to get the knife or something and do this, and but it's pressurized. And so if you could imagine, I brought two. No. Thanks for asking, though. We get them. Okay, maybe Paisley. We'll see. There's only 5, though. That's not enough for your family. So they pressurize, and if you could imagine this pressure, and this was like the cultural pressure that this church was facing. They were getting it on both sides. And Paul and Epaphras were nervous that this pressure on these people's faith was going to get to the point where it was going to squeeze them so much that their faith was just going to go, I can't do it anymore. This is too much. And so Paul writes this letter. And so here are the cultural pressures, though. Imagine this, okay? So this is in a Greek world, a Roman world, right? First of all, they were experiencing this pressure of this mystical polytheism. Okay, that's just a big word for there were a lot of different gods. Okay, a lot of different gods in the Greek culture, and we studied a lot of them in school. All these different gods that you worshipped for all kinds of different reasons. If you wanted to fall in love, you'd worship this god. If you needed healing, you'd worship this god, and this was the god of this and this and this and this and this and this. And so these new Christians were experiencing this pressure of the people around them saying, yeah, hey, Jesus, this whole Jesus thing, that's awesome. That's great. Hey, we'll just kind of slide him in here with these other gods. And whenever you need him, you just go to him. So this polytheism where Jesus was just another one of this wider range of gods. And so people were trying to convince these Christians who were being told, no, Jesus is the only way. People were trying to convince him, no, Jesus isn't the only way. He's just one of the ways. And so this pressure began to build from these outside sources, this cultural pressure. And so they began to kind of ask these questions like, well, maybe they're right. Maybe this faith thing isn't exactly what we thought it was. But then on the other side, On the other side, this pressure, they had this pressure to observe the law, to observe the Jewish law. And so we saw this pressure even to Jewish people themselves, even to the Hebrews, where it's no, you need to follow this law and this law and this law and this law. And that's, yes, the Jesus thing, that's good, but these laws are what gets you to Jesus, and so you need to do this. And so both sides just squeezing them. And these Christians, these new Christians were going, this is good, but this is a lot of pressure. Paul's contention was that to give in to either of these pressures was to compromise their faith in Christ. But see, because this belief in all these gods, that wasn't enough. It was faith in Christ that saves you. And this belief in following the Torah and following the law, see, that wasn't enough either. Even Jesus himself said, I didn't come to abolish the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill them. And so Paul's saying, if you just follow the law, that's okay. But if Jesus isn't on the throne of your heart, then you're not okay. You're not good. In response to the polytheism, the worship of many gods, Paul says in Colossians chapter 2, verse 15, when he's talking about what Christ did, he says he disarmed the powers and authorities, and he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. See, Jesus triumphed over all of those spiritual powers. And in response to the law, Jesus fulfilled the laws which lacked the power to change the heart of the believer. See, they were a set of standards to live by, but they didn't change the heart of the believer. So Paul wanted to remind the Colossians of what Christ did. And he wanted to challenge them to a greater devotion to Jesus. If you go back and read chapters 1 and 2, 3 will make more sense, but we don't have time to do that right now. But starting in chapter 3, verse 1, Paul writes, "Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory." So how do we have this attitude of love, compassion, kindness toward others? How does this happen? How can we authentically live that out? Paul says you can't do it. Okay, I'm paraphrasing Paul. You can't do it if your mind and your heart is set on earthly things. It's impossible. But if your mind is set on heavenly things, if your heart is set on heavenly things, if you have a kingdom perspective, a kingdom of heaven perspective, as opposed to a kingdom of earth and what's going on around you perspective, if you can have that perspective, where everything I do is based on what heaven tells me to do, what God tells me to do, what God says is right or wrong, then it is possible to live a life of compassion, of kindness, of peace, of love, of joy. See, Paul reminds them at the beginning of chapter 3, don't forget who you are. See, you're living like you used to live. Don't forget that you are different. You're not who you used to be. You're falling back into your old ways of being too cognizant of what's going on around you. See, I am so convinced. Let me back up. Disjointed relationships in our lives are so hard. They are so tough. It's hard when someone has hurt us. We talked about this morning in Sunday school. It is hard. I am not downplaying that at all, and I don't believe the Apostle Paul would make light of that. But see, the question isn't what has that person done to me, but the question is, what can I do to control what I can control? What can I do to respond in a way that is becoming of who God has called me to be? See, I have a responsibility not for that person's actions. I am not responsible for that person's actions. However, I am responsible for my own response to that person's actions. That stinks. Because I want to be mad. I want to get them. I want to do to them what they did to me because they deserve it. But I'm responsible to God for how I respond. And Paul says, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God, and set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. See, I'm convinced that our messed up relationships are a great way to keep our eyes on earthly things. That's a great strategy by the enemy. Oh man, how many times have we gotten wrapped up in the mess that's around us? No judgment here. I've been there. But what a great strategy. How can we keep their minds on earthly things? Let's keep reminding them of the mess that's around them. The Message says, verse 1, chapter 3 says, so if you're serious about living this new resurrection life with Christ, then act like it. Let me read that again. This is the Message. If you're serious about living this new resurrection life with Christ, then act like it. See, if we live our lives in such a way where kindness, compassion, gentleness, forgiveness, if those are not a part of who we are, then stop claiming that you are a follower of Christ. Stop. Because you are not living this new resurrection life. And to say you are and then to act different is worse than just acting like you really are. If you're serious about living this new resurrection life with Christ, act like it. Pursue the things over which Christ presides. Don't shuffle along with your eyes to the ground, absorbed with the things right in front of you. I'm still in the Message here. Your old life is dead. Your new life, which is your real life, even though invisible to spectators, is with Christ in God. And in verse 9, I know I'm kind of jumping around here. It says, you're done with that old life. Paul's telling the Colossians, don't forget. I know you're acting the way you used to do, but don't forget that you're done with that. Christ already took care of this. You don't have to live that way anymore. I know the temptation's still there, but you don't have to live that way. You can choose to live in the new life, this resurrection life that Christ has provided for you. And if you don't, then you're choosing not to. Nobody's making you do it. I know there's no amens there because that is hard to hear. It's hard to say. You are making the choice to live your old way or in this new resurrection life that Christ has provided for you. You're done with that old life. It's like a filthy set of ill-fitting clothes that you've stripped off and thrown into the fire. But now you're dressed in a new wardrobe. Every item of your new way of life is custom made by the Creator with His label on it. Think about that illustration that I know Peterson is using that illustration, but it's a great way to understand this old way of living and this new way of living. It's like you've got a whole new set of clothes. And I'm not going to get into a fashion thing because I'm the last person that should be talking about fashion. In fact, in Sunday school, I whispered to Amy and I said, I'm wearing black shoes with navy socks. I am. She said, that's okay. You can hardly tell. And maybe that's in now. I don't know. It might be fine. But imagine, I wanted to bring my high school letter jacket with me this morning. I still have it somewhere. I have no idea. I didn't have the energy to find it. That letter jacket that was the thing for like 2.5 years of my life. I wore that thing every day. I was able to letter in football and track my sophomore year, and that was like a cool thing, so I could get my letter jacket before my junior year. So I had like 2.5 years to wear around my letter jacket, and it was fine. It fit. It was all wherever I went with that thing, no one said, what's he doing wearing a letter jacket? But what if I wore it now? Like, what if I wore my high school letter jacket everywhere I went now? I mean, everybody would be going, living in the past, you think? Right? It doesn't fit. Forget the fact that it may not fit, but it doesn't fit the situation I'm in now. That is an old life for me. I have great memories. My high school times were awesome. I can brag about lettering and football, but that's done. It's so childish. Why would I? No offense, high schoolers. It's okay. Do it. But just know it's only for like 2 years. And when you go away to college, if you wear that thing at college, you will get so made fun of. So don't do it. But that's an old way of life for me. I would be silly to walk around with it now. It's old. I've got a new wardrobe now. Now I dress up every once in a while. Remember the denim stretch jeans I talked about? Now I've got denim stretch jeans. Why would I wear my letter jacket? It doesn't make sense. And Paul is saying, why? You have been given a new wardrobe. And this new wardrobe has been custom fit by the Creator. And He's got His label all over it. And He's given it to you. Why in the world would you set it aside and put on the old clothes that do not fit who you are anymore? Because who you are is you are a child of God. You were worth enough that Jesus Christ died on the cross for you, and you still want to live in your old ways? Are you kidding me? Now, don't make fun of each other for wearing those old clothes, because it's so easy to get back in those habits. But see, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, we all know this, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone and the new has come. So how in the world do we choose these qualities that we find in verses 12 through 14? It says, chosen by God for this new life of love, dress in the wardrobe God picked out for you. Compassion, kindness, humility, quiet strength, discipline. Oh, this is the one I don't like coming up. Be even-tempered. I don't like that one. That's the hard one for me. Right? Right, my family? Be content with second place. Be quick to forgive an offense. Forgive as quickly and as completely as the Master forgave you. And regardless of what else you put on, wear love. It's your basic all-purpose garment. Never be without it. So how do we live? How do we choose these qualities? When we live with a perspective that focuses on the world around us, it's easy to freak out when life throws things at us. When we live and our perspective is only right here, right now, that's when we freak out, right? That's when we're like, oh, I can't have peace right now. Oh, I can't forgive right now because our perspective is so limited. It's easy to say, I can't do that. You don't know what they've done. I get it, somewhat. But when we live life with a kingdom perspective, we can say, I know how this ends. I know what the final score looks like. And it's this new wardrobe, this life that Christ has made available to me. This is what wins. This is what turns out okay. This is the good that works together for those who love Him, for those who live according to His ways. This is how it ends. And so just like that game with Dwayne Rudd, even when everything looked like there is no way possible the Chiefs can win this game. I'm watching it with my own eyes. The clock says 0. He's out of bounds at the 25. They're down by 2. Everything in front of me that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing, it all says the game is over. But I wasn't freaking out because I knew what the final score was. And if we are followers of Christ, if we have been transformed and are continuing to be transformed into His image, we don't have to freak out. We don't have to freak out because we know the final score. God, thank you. Thank you for sending your Son to triumph over these cultural pressures around us. And God, they're everywhere. See, it's acceptable to just treat people how we've been treated. That's acceptable. It's oftentimes encouraged. But that's not who you've called us to be. It's acceptable to make sure someone gets their punishment as long as it fits the crime. But that's not who you've called us to be. You've called us to put on your wardrobe with your name on the label, to clothe ourselves with compassion, with kindness, with forgiveness, with peace, and with love. God, my prayer this morning is that you would speak to our hearts, that we might find one of these qualities that you might challenge us with this week. But God, you are in control. You are on the throne. Lord, help us. Help us to seek the correct throne and the correct ruler. And that's you, God. Jesus, we love you and we praise you. Would you all stand with me now as we close out our time together? And this week, may you remember that God is on the throne, that Jesus already paid the price. It's already taken care of. It's already done. The final score is already set. And as Apostle Paul encouraged the Colossians, I encourage you to just walk in that and to live in that. May God bless you. Thank you. You're dismissed.